It was an ordinary Thursday morning in June of 1997 when 29-year-old USPS driver Marlene Carter started her delivery route in the quiet suburbs of Pine Hills, Florida. The sun was already climbing, casting long shadows across trimmed lawns and white picket fences. Its neighbors waved at her like they always did. She smiled back, her blue uniform pressed and her U.S. mail van loaded with parcels, letters, and small-town routines. Everything about that day seemed completely normal until she didn't come home. Marlene had driven the same route for nearly 4 years. She was well-liked, always on time, and known for going the extra mile literally to make sure packages reached doorsteps safely. Her last confirmed stop was at the corner of Glenview and 3rd, around 10:23 a.m., where a security camera caught a brief glimpse of her van pulling up. Then nothing. No more sightings, no more deliveries scanned, just silence. Her van vanished without a trace. Her family knew something was wrong within hours. Marlene was the kind of person who texted if she was going to be 5 minutes late, let alone disappear without a word. Her mother, Gloria, reported her missing that evening. By midnight, the local police had launched a search. Neighbors volunteered, helicopters swept the skies. And every canal, wooded lot, and stretch of road within 20 miles was combed for any sign of her. But there was nothing, no van, no uniform, no packages spilled across the pavement. Just an eerie, gaping mystery. The official investigation ran hot for the first few weeks. Theories came and went. Some believed she'd been carjacked mid-route. Others speculated she might have witnessed something she wasn't supposed to. A few even whispered that maybe she'd chosen to vanish. Those who knew her best shut that idea down instantly. Marlene was close with her family, proud of her job, and had just been promoted. She had plans: a weekend beach trip, a nephew's birthday party. She was saving up for a new car. None of it added up. As months turned into years, the story faded from headlines. Leads dried up. The missing person flyers weathered and peeled from telephone poles. But her family never gave up. Gloria kept Marlene's room just the way she'd left it. Her sister Rachel launched an online blog pleading for answers. Her coworkers left her a seat open at the annual USPS banquet every year, hoping just maybe she'd walk through the door again. But the calendar kept turning, and no answers ever came. Then, 7 years later, something happened. It was March of 2004 when the city of Pine Hills approved a cleanup project for the old industrial canal near Brookdale Avenue. Years of debris had choked the waterway, turning it into more of a swamp than a canal. Locals had complained about the smell, the mosquitoes, the strange slick bubbling up after storms. The city brought in heavy equipment, drained the water, and started scraping up trash, tires, old bicycles, everything you'd expect in a place like that. What no one expected was what they found next. On the 3rd day of the cleanup, a rusted-out blue USPS mail van emerged from the thick sludge, half buried in the mud beneath an overpass. The side door was still sealed shut. The tires were sunken. A faint trace of faded lettering U.S. mail clung to the side like a ghost from another time. The workers froze. One of them called 911. Within the hour, the area was swarming with officers, news vans, and stunned locals standing in silence behind yellow tape. The van was towed out and taken in for examination. The license plate matched the one registered to Marlene Carter back in 1997. Inside, investigators found a few old mailbags, still sealed with the postal locks, a clipboard, a lunchbox. But the most haunting detail: the driver's seat was empty, not a single human bone. No signs of struggle, no broken glass. Just a perfectly preserved time capsule of a day that started out like any other, and ended in a mystery that still haunts Pine Hills to this day. Questions swirled all over again. How had the van ended up there without anyone seeing it? Had it been dumped there intentionally? Did Marlene drive it there herself? Was someone else behind the wheel that day? And if she wasn't in the van, then where did she go? Local news. Stations revived the story. True crime forums lit up with theories. Some people pointed out that the canal was only a few blocks away from one of the neighborhoods. Marlene delivered to how could such a massive vehicle disappear so close to home without a trace for 7 whole years? Others asked why it took so long for anyone to find it was someone covering something up. Or had the van simply sunk too deep, lost beneath years of mud, water, and neglect? One thing was certain: the discovery of the van reawakened the entire town. People who had long stopped talking about Marlene were suddenly remembering small details. A strange noise they heard that morning. A man they didn't recognize loitering near a mailbox. Someone said their dog had barked non-stop around the time. She went missing, facing the direction of the canal, but none of it led anywhere concrete. Just more fragments of a puzzle that never quite fit together. What happened to Marlene Carter? Did she vanish willingly, or was she taken? Why did her van end up in that canal? What else, if anything, is still waiting to be discovered beneath the surface? As we go deeper into this story, we'll follow the clues, revisit the key moments of the investigation, and uncover new insights that might finally explain what happened on that quiet morning in 1997. But first, let's rewind the clock to the day Marlene vanished, and look at everything that led up to the moment her route stopped. In the middle of nowhere, because somewhere out there, the truth is still waiting to be delivered. The morning Marlene Carter disappeared was just like any other on her route. She started her shift around 7:15 a.m. from the Pine Hills USPS distribution center, where she checked in, loaded her mailbags, and shared a few laughs with coworkers. Her supervisor, Leonard Hayes, later said she seemed perfectly normal, maybe a little tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. She had her coffee, her clipboard, and her usual calm energy. No one could have imagined it would be the last time they'd see her. Her delivery route was mostly residential, covering quiet streets and cul-de-sacs filled with families, retirees, and the occasional loose dog she knew by name. People in the neighborhood remembered her for her warmth and small acts of kindness, like leaving handwritten notes if someone's mailbox was loose or taking an extra moment to check on an elderly resident. She'd become part of the community, even though most only saw her for seconds each day. Witnesses that day all told the same kind of story. They saw her driving down Magnolia Lane around 9:40 a.m., stopping briefly to deliver a small parcel. A man watering his lawn near Glenview recalled waving to her and getting a wave back. Another neighbor, Mrs. Daly, said she heard the sliding van door close outside her home just after 10:15. She didn't see Marlene directly, but found her mail delivered neatly, as always. After that, the trail just ended. The next address on her list never received their mail. When investigators first pieced together her last known movements, they hoped to find a simple explanation: breakdown, a medical emergency, anything. But there were no signs of distress called in over the radio. Her cell phone had no outgoing calls after 10:06 a.m. GPS tracking on the van was limited back then, and the signal cut out sometime around 10:30. That was the moment everything seemed to stop. Her family was stunned. Marlene had no known enemies. She wasn't dating anyone at the time, had no financial troubles, and lived a modest, quiet life in a one-bedroom apartment she'd just redecorated. She loved books, old jazz records, and volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. Her younger sister Rachel described her as the most reliable person I've ever known. That reliability became a painful reminder as days turned to weeks, and still no answers. One odd detail stood out early in the investigation. A resident on Dover Street, about a mile from her usual route, called in to report something strange. Around 11 a.m. on the day Marlene vanished, He claimed he saw a blue USPS van parked awkwardly on the side of the Canal access road. It wasn't blocking traffic, but it was tilted like it had veered too far off the pavement. He didn't see anyone inside, and at the time, thought maybe the driver had stopped for a break or gotten stuck. Police followed up, but by the time they reached the location, the van was gone. The tip wasn't given much weight. At first, people misidentify vehicles all the time. But after the van was found in that exact canal 7 years later, the memory became chilling. Had Marlene been inside when it went in, or was she already gone by then? Theories spread fast. Some locals suspected foul play. Maybe someone flagged her down, pretending to need help. She was known to be kind, the type who wouldn't ignore someone in distress. Others thought maybe someone used her trust against her. She delivered mail to hundreds of homes. What if one of those residents had darker intentions? A few people pointed fingers at a man named Barry Lanning, a former city maintenance worker who had been questioned during the initial investigation. He lived alone in a small house on the edge of her route and had a reputation for odd behavior. He reportedly had an argument with Marlene a few months before she disappeared, complaining about damaged mail. Police looked into him, searched his property, but found no evidence to link him. Still, whispers about him never fully died down. There was also the matter of the missing camera footage. One security camera from a nearby bank was supposed to capture the intersection Marlene would have passed around 10:40 a.m., but the tape for that hour was mysteriously blank, either erased or never recorded properly. Whether it was a technical failure or something more deliberate, no one could say for sure. Investigators labeled it a dead end, but to Marlene's sister Rachel, it felt like one more piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. As the years passed, the pressure on the case faded. New crimes took over the headlines. Detectives moved 2 different departments. But Gloria Carter, Marlene's mother, kept a binder filled with newspaper clippings, witness statements, and handwritten notes of her own. She reread them often, refusing to let her daughter's story vanish like she did. Rachel kept posting online, hoping to spark new interest. Every anniversary, she made a public plea for information, sometimes to empty comment sections, sometimes 2 small waves of support. Then came the Canal. The cleanup crew who found the van described it as one of the eeriest moments of their lives. The way the shape emerged through the thick, dark mud. The silence that followed. One of the workers said it felt like pulling a ghost from the water. Even after all that time, the van was shockingly intact, though rusted and stained. The frame had held together. Inside, they found stacks of unopened mail, still dated June 1997. It was like opening a time capsule of a day frozen in place. But the real mystery wasn't just what they found. It was what they didn't. No blood, no torn fabric, no fingerprints, no sign Marlene had ever struggled, and no body. It was as if she had vanished before the van ever went into the water. Forensics confirmed it was her van, her clipboard, her name on the documents. But there was something off about the driver's seat. It had been pushed back farther than Marlene, who was only 5'4", would have said it. It suggested someone else may have driven it last. Someone taller. Someone trying to make a clean getaway. That single detail opened the case again, quietly, but with fresh eyes. A new detective, Elise Ramos, picked it up in 2005 and began combing through the original files. She wasn't convinced. This was a random disappearance. There were too many loose ends. Too many signs that someone had carefully covered their tracks, but who and why? The deeper she looked, the stranger it got. A second USPS driver had reported being followed a week before Marlene disappeared, something they hadn't thought much of until later. Another postal worker said she thought she saw someone standing near Marlene's van that morning, wearing a dark hoodie, but never got a clear look. None of these leads had gone anywhere at the time. but taken together, they painted a disturbing picture, one where Marlene might have been watched, targeted, and maybe never stood a chance. Still, with no witnesses, no suspect, and no body, the case remains unsolved. What really happened on that June morning? Who was driving that van when it slipped into the canal? And if Marlene wasn't in it, where did she'll go? The answers might be buried somewhere in the details, lost to time. Or maybe, just maybe, someone out there still knows the truth. Detective Elise Ramos kept the case file on her desk, separate from the others. She called it her ghost file, not because it scared her, but because it never stopped haunting her. There was something in it, something incomplete. The more she read through the witness statements and sifted through the old evidence, the more she felt like someone had gone to great lengths to make Marlene Carter disappear. Not just physically, but from the memory of the town. She started reaching out to people who had known Marlene, even those who had only spoken to her once or twice. She wanted to hear voices, feel the rhythm of the days before and after she vanished. One of the first people she visited was Mrs. Daly, the woman who'd heard the van door close that morning. She was in her 80s now, nearly blind. But when she spoke about Marlene, her tone softened. She remembered hearing a strange engine sound just after the van left. A different hum, not the van. Something heavier. Elise pressed her gently for more, but Mrs. Daly couldn't say much else. Just that it felt out of place. Elise then tracked down Barry Lanning again, the former city worker who had been considered suspicious years earlier. He now lived in a trailer on the edge of the county line. He was older, slower, and more guarded than he had been. When asked about Marlene, he didn't react right away. Just stared at her for a long time, then muttered, "Still chasing ghosts." She noted how he never directly denied knowing anything. She didn't press him too hard yet, she added, a red flag next to his name, while Elise investigated from one angle. Rachel Carter, Marlene's sister, continued her own efforts online. She had grown used to people brushing her off, but she refused to let the story die. One night, while going through an old blog she hadn't updated in years, she found an anonymous message in the comment section. It had been posted months earlier. No name, just a single sentence. "Check the old power station off Route 9. She was there." It could have been a prank. Rachel had received plenty of them over the years, but this one felt different. The timing was odd. It had been posted not long after the canal cleanup. She emailed the message to Elise, who took it seriously enough to send a team out to the power station. It had been shut down since 1995, just a couple of years before Marlene vanished. Oh, they found nothing directly tied to her. No clothes, no van parts, no physical evidence, but behind one of the old steel doors was a patch of floor that had clearly been cleaned. To clean. In a building layered with grime and dust, this one corner looked like someone had wiped it down recently. Elise took samples, sent them to the lab. Results came back inconclusive traces of bleach, but nothing human. Still, it confirmed one thing: someone had been there, long after the building had officially closed. Meanwhile, the public started talking again. News coverage around the drained canal and the mail van had sparked interest, and with it came new stories. A man who used to fish near the canal swore he saw a figure standing by the overpass one morning in 1997, just staring at the water. He couldn't describe the face, but remembered a USPS cap in their hand. Another woman, who had since moved out of state, emailed Elise after seeing the van on TV. She used to jog near that area. One morning, she'd seen muddy tire marks leading into the trees near the same access road where the van was later pulled from. She hadn't thought much of it then, but now, looking back, she wondered. There was a new theory developing. What if the canal wasn't the final stop, but just the last place someone needed the van to be seen? What if Marlene had been taken? Somewhere else, first maybe the power station. Maybe somewhere they hadn't found yet 10. Then the van had been driven into the canal to hide the evidence. Elise kept thinking about the van seat. It didn't fit. Someone taller had definitely been driving it last. But if it wasn't Marlene, then who was it? She combed through employee records from the postal office, checking if anyone had a reason. To harm her, nothing stood out. No workplace issues, no harassment reports. But she did find something curious: an employee named Trevor Miles, who had worked a different route but quit 2 weeks after Marlene disappeared. He'd moved to another. Staten changed his number shortly after. That alone wasn't suspicious. But he'd also been off work the day Marlene went missing. No one remembered seeing him at home. Elise tracked him down in Georgia. When she knocked on his door, he hesitated before opening it. He denied knowing anything about the case. Said he barely remembered Marlene. She was nice, he offered. Vaguely. But his hands shook when he said it. And when she mentioned the canal, he looked away. She couldn't arrest him. There wasn't enough. But she left him with her card. "In case your memory improves," she said before walking back to her car at the same time. Another thread emerged, one nobody had explored in detail. A series of missing packages around the time Marlene vanished. It hadn't seemed connected. At first, a few envelopes gone missing. Small items. But when Elise followed the paper trail, she found something odd. There were 3 registered packages that had been logged under Marlene's route that day, but they were never delivered and never found inside the recovered van. 2 of them were fairly routine books, according to the records, but one was marked confidential, sent from a local government office to a private residence. The contents weren't listed. Elise reached out to the intended recipient. An older man who had since passed away, but his daughter remembered her father talking about it. He'd been expecting some old files from the city archives records about land usage in the canal area, of all things. It felt like one more puzzle piece falling into the same murky picture. Was Marlene simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or had she seen something, read something, that got her caught in something much bigger? None of the answers were clear yet, but every step forward only added more weight to the mystery. There were too many people with half-memories, too many strange coincidences. And through it all, one thing never changed. Marlene Carter was still missing. As Elise sat in her car one evening, flipping through her notes, she paused on a photo of Marlene smiling in her uniform, holding a small package under her arm. Behind her, the street was lined with palm trees, calm and familiar. That was the last known photo of her, taken just 3 days before she vanished. So much had changed since then. But one question still remained, cutting through everything like a quiet voice in the dark. Who was the last person to see her alive? Elise didn't sleep well anymore. The case had woven itself into her life in a way she hadn't expected. Every quiet moment felt like a space where Marlene's story pressed in every street corner. Every sudden memory someone shared. The unanswered pieces clawed at her. She'd stare at the old map of Pine Hills, tracing the mail route with her finger again and again, trying to see what Marlene saw that day. Something about the timing still felt wrong. Marlene was ahead of schedule. The morning she disappeared, she should have reached the last street on her route by 10:45. Instead, she vanished at least 30 minutes before that. What happened in that gap? One night, Elise returned to the canal site. The mud had dried now, leaving only broken concrete, rusted junk, and the imprint where the van had sunk. She stood in silence, listening to the soft hum of the freeway in the distance. Across the waterline, a single street lamp flickered. She closed her eyes and tried to picture it: Marlene driving in, the van stopping, the door opening. Was she alone? Was someone forcing her? She walked slowly toward the area where the van had been pulled. That's when she noticed something. The edge of the pavement near the canal wasn't as worn as the rest. A chunk of it had clearly broken more recently than 7 years ago. She crouched down, brushing her hand across the gravel, found faint scrape marks thin but visible under the right light. Tire marks. But not just any tire marks, dual tracks from a different vehicle, likely a second van or truck. That piece had never come up in the reports. It meant Marlene's vehicle might not have been alone that day. Someone else could have been waiting back. At the station, Elise dug through archived utility reports from the week Marlene vanished. Construction near the canal had closed one road temporarily, rerouting drivers. That detour went right past the old power station and ended near the back entrance of the postal yard. Quiet spot rarely used, mostly for equipment storage. That meant someone who knew the area well could have avoided being seen completely. And if that person was watching Marlene's movements, they could have planned the whole thing around that detour. She contacted the city office again, asking for personnel logs from the cleanup crew at the canal. They sent over a list of names, mostly laborers and contracted workers. One name stood out, Tyler Grange. It triggered something in her mind. She had seen that name before, deep in one of the original reports. He had been a part-time janitor at the Pine Hills post office in 1997, only worked there for 3 months before quitting without notice. 1 week after Marlene vanished, Elise ran his background. Tyler had moved 3 times since then, finally settling in a small town north of Ocala. No criminal record, no flagged behavior, just a quiet man who'd slipped under the radar. But the timing felt too precise to be coincidence. She made the drive out early the next morning. His house was modest, set back from the road with a chain-link fence and a half-broken mailbox. Faded USPS stickers were still on his garage door. She knocked once. No answer. Knocked again. A dog barked from the back. Then finally, the door creaked open. Tyler stood there, thinner than his old ID photo, graying around the edges, wearing a plain shirt and jeans. His eyes darted quickly from her badge to her face. "I'm looking into an old missing persons case," Elise said calmly. "Marlene Carter. You worked at the post office when she disappeared." He didn't respond, just stepped back slightly and swallowed hard. "I need to ask you a few questions," she continued. "It's important." He hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Inside, the house was quiet. Clean, but with an odd tension in the air, like a place that had too many secrets. Elise noticed a calendar on the wall empty. No appointments, no birthdays marked. The kind of blank slate that suggested isolation or maybe avoidance, she asked. Simple questions at first. What did he remember about Marlene? Did they ever speak? Had he noticed anything unusual that week? His answers were vague. She seemed nice. Not really. People were always in a hurry. But his hands never stopped moving, fidgeting with a ring on his finger, picking at a worn coaster on the table. And then he said something that made her pause. Funny how they never found her. It wasn't what he said did, was how he said it. Not surprised, not curious, just flat. Like someone who already knew. Elise looked him in the eye. "What makes you think they won't?" Tyler didn't blink. Sometimes people don't want to be found. She left shortly after, without confrontation. But when she got back in her car, she made a call to request surveillance on him, just in case. Her gut told her he wasn't just a witness. He was a thread one that might finally pull the story toward its breaking point. That same evening, Rachel received another anonymous message on her blog. No name, no timestamp. Just 4 words. It wasn't just her. Rachel froze, staring at the screen. She hadn't mentioned any new details online in weeks. Was someone watching her too? She forwarded the message to Elise, who began looking into other USPS-related incidents in the area during that time. That's when she found it. A missing report buried in a separate county filing, a man named Eric Bell. Reported missing 6 months before Marlene, last seen driving a van on a rural route. His disappearance had never been connected to hers. But suddenly, the similarities were too strong to ignore. His van was never recovered. No final scan. Just like Marlene. Elise pieced together a map. Both vanished near older city infrastructure routes that passed through isolated areas with minimal surveillance at the time. She started to wonder, were these disappearances random? Or was someone targeting certain routes, certain people? The fear was no longer just about a single crime. It was about a pattern. Something older. Something buried. She reviewed the original. Van's condition again. There had been one more strange thing besides the pushed-back driver's seat. A small metal badge wedged beneath the floor mat. It hadn't matched USPS equipment. The lab had tested it, but no one had been able to trace it until now. Elise had it retested, this time with access to newer databases. The badge had once belonged to a contractor someone hired during a short-term city cleanup effort back in 1996. The same contractor had also worked near the canal, near the power station, and had logged hours at the very postal facility where Marlene worked, and their name. Tyler Grange. The tension broke like a wire snapping in Elise's chest. Everything was coming together. But the clock was ticking. If Tyler had been involved in more than one disappearance, he'd had years to cover his tracks. But people like him slip eventually. They get comfortable. They start talking to the wrong person. Or maybe, just maybe, they go back to where it all started. Elise made one final note in her case file before shutting her laptop tomorrow. She would return to the canal, and this time, she wasn't going alone. Elise returned to the canal at first light, the air damp and heavy with the smell of earth and decay. Fog clung to the ground like a veil, and the familiar crunch of gravel beneath her boots echoed louder than usual. She wasn't alone this time. 2 forensic techs followed her in, quiet but alert. The focus wasn't on the site where the van had been pulled, was on a narrow, overgrown path running behind the canal wall, a trail too tight for a full-sized vehicle, but just wide enough for someone to walk or drag something. The city's blueprints from 1996 showed something: a dawn access tunnel, long sealed and forgotten, running underneath the canal system. It connected to an old drainage substation decommissioned the year before Marlene vanished. Elise hadn't seen the tunnel mentioned in any original reports, probably because no one knew it existed, but it was there, hidden beneath the soil. And scrubbed with a crowbar and some work, they pried open the rusted gate. The air that came out was cold and stale, as if sealed away for decades. Flashlights pierced the darkness as they stepped inside. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the smell of mildew clung to every surface. The walls were lined with crumbling concrete, stained by time. They walked slowly, careful not to speak, the silence stretching like a wire pulled tight. About 30 feet in, one of the techs stopped. He knelt beside a collapsed pipe and pulled something free from the dirt, a small plastic tag, cracked but legible. It read, USPS property, and below it, barely visible, was a handwritten name in faded ink. M. Carter. Elise's breath caught. It wasn't a direct answer, but it was enough to confirm what she feared: someone had brought her down here. Suddenly, one of the techs called out from farther in, "Detective, you need to see this." She followed the beam of his flashlight and stopped cold. There, tucked behind a stack of rusted crates, was an old locker, the kind you'd find in a break room or city maintenance station. It was dented, the door hanging ajar. Inside were several objects wrapped in plastic items Elise recognized immediately from the missing person reports, but not all of them belonged to Marlene. There were keys labeled with a different USPS route number. A badge marked E. Bell, Eric Bell, the other postal worker who had disappeared, and something else. A photograph. Not of Marlene, not of Eric, but of a woman Elise didn't recognize, standing in front of a rural mailbox, smiling. She turned the photo over. On the back was a name and date. D. Vargas, July 1995. A. Third person. No one had ever reported Danielle Vargas as connected to the case. She wasn't in the files, wasn't in the witness lists. Elise made a note and checked missing persons records the moment she got back to her car, and there it was, buried deep. Danielle Vargas, 32. Reported missing in 1995 while working a temporary postal job to counties south. Case marked cold. No foul play suspected. Now Elise had 3 missing postal workers, all within a 2-year span. All connected by geography, timing, and now physical evidence. This wasn't about Marlene anymore. It was bigger. Someone had been targeting USPS drivers. And if the timeline held true, they had been doing it quietly, methodically, and without a trace. The second twist began to unravel quickly. Elise dug through payroll records and temporary contractor files. She searched for overlaps, people who had been present near all 3 disappearances. It took hours, dozens of dead ends. But one name kept coming back. Jared Knox, a logistics subcontractor who had briefly worked on infrastructure routes in all 3 areas. His record was clean. No complaints, no criminal history. But he'd moved around just enough to never raise suspicion. And here's where it got darker. Jared wasn't just a contractor. Before that, he'd served as a field inspector for the Postal Service's maintenance division. His job, inspect and report on high-risk delivery routes. Places where roads were bad, access was limited, or staffing was short. He would have had access to schedules, routes, and employee profiles. And he'd have known which workers were alone and when. Elise had never heard his name before. Neither had any of the original investigators. But the evidence kept pointing back to him. A report surfaced showing that Jared had requested a field inspection near the Pine Hills Canal in 1997, just weeks before Marlene vanished. The reason listed: drainage erosion affecting route security. No follow-up report was ever filed. The signature on the document matched city records, but Elise had it tested anyway. The ink analysis confirmed it had been altered. Someone had tried to redate the paperwork. The story was changing again. The conflict had grown beyond a single woman's disappearance. This wasn't just about a van in a canal anymore. It was about a hidden pattern, one that had slipped through the cracks for nearly a decade. Rachel was the first person Elise told about the new connection. She listened silently on the phone, barely breathing. "How many others?" she whispered. "I don't know," Elise admitted. "But I think we've only scratched the surface." Then came the email, sent from an encrypted address, no name. Just a subject line: "You're getting too close." Inside was a single sentence: "Some things are buried for a reason. Stop digging." Attached was a blurry security photo of Elise herself. Standing in front of the canal gate 2 days earlier, she stared at it, heart pounding. Someone was watching her, and they weren't afraid to let her know it. This wasn't just about the past anymore. Someone out there was still keeping the secret, still pulling the strings. And Elise was next on their list. Elise stared at the photo for a long time. The grainy image of her standing at the canal gate, time-stamped, silent. Threatening proof that whoever had been hiding all these years was still out there, still watching. The fear sat in her chest, like a weight, but it was the pattern that scared her more. Every piece pointed back to one person. Jared Knox had slipped through the system for nearly a decade. His contracts were short-term, quiet, never in one place for too long. No red flags. No fingerprints. But the tunnel, the locker, the altered reports, all of it led back to him. She worked quickly over the next 24 hours, looping in federal agents who had followed the case loosely since the Canal discovery. With their help, she secured a warrant for Knox's current property, a rural parcel just outside Jacksonville. It wasn't much a faded house, 2 storage sheds, and a long gravel driveway flanked by overgrown weeds. When Elise and the team arrived, they moved in quietly, not wanting to tip him off. Knox wasn't home. But what they found inside one of the sheds made everything crash into place. Stacked in plastic bins were bundles of old uniforms, name badges, route maps, pieces of history that didn't belong to one person but several. Elise pulled out a sealed envelope marked "Do Not Deliver," dated 1997. Inside was Marlene's final undelivered letter, still in its original sleeve, still bearing the ink of a no-defunct postmark. It had been with him the whole time. Underneath the bins was a floor hatch. Elise hesitated, flashlight in hand, before opening it. The air below was cold and damp. A crawl space, maybe 10 feet deep, lined with cinder block. And at the far end, old metal filing cabinet. Inside were dozens of records, most postal. But buried in the back was something worse. A journal. Page after page, written in tight, slanted handwriting. Not confessions exactly, but observations. Thoughts, chilling accounts of each victim. How long they were watched. What routes they ran. And in some entries, comments about their behavior, their kindness. Even their habits. Elise read the page dated June 12, 1997. She waves to people. Every day, same wave. Like it matters. Like she knows them. The next line was underlined. Tomorrow's the right day. Timing's perfect. There it was. The plan. The day he chose Marlene, she closed the book, stomach churning. Jared Knox had been profiling them, picking them based on their routes, their routines, how invisible they were to the world outside their uniforms, and then, one by one, removing them. But the unexpected twist came not from the past, but the present. As Elise stepped out of the crawl space and into the open air again, her phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice was shaking. "I got another message," she said. But it wasn't a warning this time. 'Twas an address. And a time. It just says, "She's waiting." The location was a decommissioned postal substation 2 hours west. It had been abandoned for over 20 years, falling apart. With time? But if the message was real, if it wasn't just a trap, there was a chance someone was still alive. Elise didn't hesitate. She took 2 agents and made the drive. The sun was setting when they arrived, casting deep shadows over the crumbling walls. The door was rusted but unlocked. The inside smelled of mold and wood rot. The floors creaked beneath every step in the far corner. Beyond broken mail bins and collapsed shelves, they found a room that had been sealed off with plywood. One of the agents pried it open carefully. Inside was a small space with a cot, blankets, and a bucket. No power. No light. And there, sitting in the corner, squinting at the sudden light, was a woman. She was thin. Her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes locked onto Elise's with quiet recognition. It was her. It was Marlene Carter. The world stopped for a second. Marlene didn't speak at first, just reached out slowly, as if afraid this wasn't real. Elise dropped to her knees beside her. Marlene had been alive all this time and the days that followed. Marlene's story began to emerge. After being abducted, she had been moved several times, kept isolated with little connection to the outside world. Knox had controlled everything, what she saw, what she heard. He had studied her like he had the others, but something about Marlene had made him keep her longer. Maybe it was her silence. Maybe it was her fight. She'd waited for years, holding on to the hope that someone would come looking. She had no idea her van had been found. No idea her story had been revived. But something had changed recently. Knox had grown paranoid. He started leaving notes behind, strange trails, like part of him wanted to be caught. Or maybe he knew it was over. But the twist didn't end there. When authorities raided Knox's secondary property storage unit registered under a false name, they found more files, more names, routes from different states. Unsolved disappearances Elise had never seen. Jared Knox wasn't working alone. The journal had subtle mentions of someone else, a person referred to only as M, always in the background, always watching. The final page read, "She was a test. The others are still waiting. M knows what to do next." Elise stood outside the warehouse, the cold wind pressing against her coat, and realized the truth. They had solved one part of the mystery. Marlene was safe. Knox was in custody. But the second person was still out there, and they weren't finished yet. The days after Marlene Carter's rescue felt like something out of a dream, quiet moments filled with disbelief, cautious joy, and the slow, heavy weight of grief catching up after years of being paused. She was taken to a recovery center just outside Tallahassee, surrounded by trauma specialists and doctors who worked gently, letting her heal on her own terms. Rachel visited her the next morning. Their reunion wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, powerful, and raw. They sat in silence for a long time before Marlene whispered, "You didn't stop looking." Rachel only nodded, tears streaming down her face. The years apart didn't vanish in an instant, but something broken had started to mend. Elise stayed close to the case, handling the final pieces personally. The arrest of Jared Knox made national headlines. Former contractor turned serial abductor, linked to 3 disappearances spanning a decade. The evidence against him was overwhelming: journals, clothing, stolen postal materials, altered documents. He didn't deny anything when interrogated. In fact, he said very little at all. When asked why he kept Marlene alive, his only reply was, "She stayed calm. She didn't break like the others." That sentence haunted Elise more than anything. It confirmed what they already feared: Derek Bell and Danielle Vargas hadn't been so lucky. Remains later discovered in a wooded area tied to Knox's second property gave the final answers. DNA matched both missing carriers. Quietly, the department notified their families. Though the case seemed closed on the surface, Elise couldn't shake the mention of M in Knox's journal. It lingered like a shadow, someone else involved, someone who may have been helping, or worse, guiding him. For now, there wasn't enough to build a case, just breadcrumbs. She submitted all evidence to federal authorities, knowing the investigation would continue at a deeper level. She didn't want it to consume her anymore. She needed to let it go. The town of Pine Hills had changed. But the canal where Marlene's van was pulled still carried the same quiet weight. Locals often stopped their Nowsome to leave flowers, others just to stand in silence. What had once been an ignored, overgrown stretch of water had become a place of memory and reflection. A reminder of how easy it is for people to vanish, in plain sight, and how powerful it is when someone refuses to forget them. Rachel began speaking publicly about the case. She launched a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families of missing persons, especially those often overlooked delivery workers, postal employees, people whose jobs take them into places where few others go. Her story struck a chord. People listened. More than one cold case got reopened because of it. Marlene, when she was ready, shared her voice too. In a private interview, she spoke carefully, softly, about what it felt like to be taken and erased. But she didn't focus on the fear. She talked about the little things she held on to. Memories of her route. The barking of a dog on Glenview Street. The smell of fresh-cut grass near the corner bakery. She said those details kept her anchored. They reminded her she still existed, even when no one could see her. The Postal Service honored her return with a quiet ceremony. Not flashy, just simple and human. Former coworkers came. Some who had thought she was gone forever. Others who had never met her but had followed her story over the years. Her old supervisor, Leonard Hayes, was there too. He hugged her with tears in his eyes. "You were always on time," he whispered, "even now." Elise eventually stepped away from homicide. She transferred to a new division, one focused on long-term investigations. She said it was time for someone else to take over the spotlight. But people still called her the detective who brought Marlene Carter home. She didn't chase the title. She didn't want it. For her, it wasn't about recognition. It was about the unfinished lives, about refusing to let silence become the final answer. The media slowly moved on. Other stories took over. But the Canal case remained in people's minds because it wasn't just about mystery, it was about resilience. It reminded people that justice isn't always swift, and healing isn't always visible, but both are possible, with time and persistence. As for the lingering question, who was M? That thread never got pulled fully. There were theories. A former supervisor, long retired. A government contractor with ties to Knox. A possible accomplice who left no digital trace. But nothing definitive. It left the story open just enough to keep people thinking, to keep them cautious, to remind them that some evils wear quiet faces and walk familiar streets. Still, the important part had found its end. Marlene survived. Rachel never gave up. Elise followed every lead until the silence cracked open. And the town that once whispered about a woman who vanished now spoke loudly about the one who came back. In the end, the story wasn't about the horror of being taken. It was about the strength it took to return. It was about memory, the kind that doesn't fade even when the world forgets. And it was about how sometimes the smallest routines, like a postal route on a sunny June morning, can become lifelines. Marlene Carter's name wasn't just a cold case anymore. It became something far more powerful. It became a story of survival.